Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today for the launch of the Independent Living Movement Ireland Strategic Plan 2024 to 2027. My name is Damien. I'm the CEO of ILMI. I want to run through the agenda. I'm going to be joined by our Chairperson Des Kenny, who's going to say a few words on behalf of the organisation. I'm going to invite Rachel Mullen from Values Lab to speak a little bit about the process of how we develop this plan and how values are going to guide and shape the work of our organisation over the next 3 years. I'm then going to ask some of my colleagues to speak about the values that are going to guide the strategic plan in terms of human rights. My colleague Shelly Gaynor will speak to that. My colleague Fiona Weldon will speak about the value of collective empowerment, and my colleague Dr. James Casey will speak to the value of social justice. Just before I hand over to Des to say a few words, I'm immensely proud as an organisation not only of the plan that we've developed, but the process of how we developed it and how we worked with our members, board, staff and external stakeholders to define the vision of what ILMI will become over the next 3 years. As a National Disabled Persons Organisation, or DPO, we're incredibly proud of this work. We're incredibly proud when we reviewed our previous strategic plan that we launched at the end of 2018. And at the time, that was enormously ambitious, that we were projecting the type of national DPO we would like to become. But through the excellence of our staff, the vision of our board and the energy and expertise of our members, we overachieved in that strategic plan. So as CEO, I'm enormously proud of this plan, the ambitious targets it sets, and I look forward to working with people inside this room and outside to realise that. So now I'm going to hand over to Des to say a few words on behalf of the organisation.
Thank you, Damien. I'll just read my stomach now for just 2 sentences. Don't worry, it's braille on the piece of paper rather than me suffering some form of tummy ailment. It's just that these 2 sentences are important. This strategic plan has its origins in the noble tradition of disabled people being actively engaged in our own activism for 4 decades now. The power of collective advocacy within a DPO is unparalleled. It transforms the conversations from I think to we think, providing the evidence of how inclusion must be resourced, mapping the inclusion landscape to real meaningful change. In saying those few words, which I regard as, if you like, an important, I'll hold that then, as an important encapsulation of what you're here today, I was looking at this and thinking how wonderful it is that we've gone, as it were, 4 decades into that. In February, I go to a kind of a collective of the European Blind Union, which equally is looking at 40 years of evolution into a movement across Europe that has led in its own way to rights and the evolution and development into human rights for disabled people in the collective sense. Disability doesn't belong to one type of disability. It belongs to us all. And the collective understanding of need and inclusion is common, more common probably than we give credit to. But above all, what we do need in this time and this age and this stage of advocacy is the research, the backed references, the talking to and finding out and writing down the experiences of the individual into the collective. All of you here have contributed in many ways to the evolution of the disability movement in Ireland over those 4 decades. Probably not all of you in the 4 decades, some of you probably 4 years. Some of you are babies within this movement. And what we are trying to do is to create the momentum and build on that evolution into a future of an active DPO. And the strategic plan we have before us is, if you like, the rails on which to explore and map, as I said earlier, that particular landscape. So thanks to the people who contributed to it. Thanks to Rachel for guiding the philosophy around it, because we're no longer talking about need or whatever, we're talking about a human right and a belonging within the landscape of human rights. So thank you very much, and thank you all for having come along today.
Now, apologies, there's intermittent microphone issues. I'd now like to call on Rachel Mullen from Values Lab, just to speak a little bit about the process. Values Lab worked with ILMI over a 6-month period to develop our strategic plan. And I'll just put this microphone in front of you, Rachel, so I don't have to hold it.
Thank you, Damien, and hopefully people can hear me. And it's a pleasure to be here today, but it was also an honour for myself and my colleague Neil in Values Lab to work with the organisation to develop this strategic plan that's been launched today. And we commend ILMI for taking a values-led approach to this. Just to say a little bit first maybe about values and about the power of values. And values do have power. And they have a power that needs to be understood and harnessed, including by organisations, but particularly by organisations who are concerned to pursue a more equal society, because achieving that goal will invariably involve engaging a particular set of values in the work, but also in wider society. At a personal level, our core values are those deeply held ideals that we deem to be important. They're central in motivating us towards the lives that we want to live. They're key to shaping our beliefs, our attitudes, which in turn influence our decisions, our actions, and our choices. And we are all probably here in this room because we probably share a common core set of personal values that are concerned about pursuing equality and rights for disabled people. So values have power at the personal level, but they also have huge power at the organisational level, and they hold similar motivational power. In any organisation, a dominant set of values is driving priorities, decision-making, practice, processes. And this is manifested as the culture of the organisation. And we're probably all familiar with that saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And there's a real truth in that statement, in that it captures the power of values as the deciding factor, really, in what gets done and how it gets done and how people behave. It also, though, captures the power of values, because values are the building blocks of organisational culture. So as such, organisations do need to ensure that the dominant values that are at play in driving priorities and practice are aligned with the espoused values of the organisation. And that's harder work than it might seem. And often there is a values gap between the stated espoused values, but actually the dominant values that are really driving the organisation. And yet our organisations rarely focus on organisational culture and in turn values when we're doing strategic planning, for example. And that is at our peril, I would say, because all too often assumptions are made that because the core values are named simply, that they are dominant in driving what we do and how we do it. And there's assumptions often made that there's a shared understanding among staff about what those values actually mean in reality for how we do our work and what our priorities should be. And there's often assumptions made that a set of strategic objectives that are divorced from the core values will somehow engage and embed those values in terms of output and outcome. There's an imperative there for organisations to be concerned not just about having values, but about living those core values. And it's an even greater imperative, I would argue, for civil society organisations like ILMI, whose work is very much values-based in terms of addressing equality and human rights concerns. There are core values to be engaged in this work and in wider society and in its institutions that need to be prioritised if this change is to occur. These are core values that need to be visible in the work of civil society organisations so that it is always evident that what we preach is what we practice. These are core values that need to be consciously defended if they're to be held firm, given that many of the institutions we engage with don't necessarily prioritise the same set of core values. So how does an organisation like ILMI ensure that it is living its core values? To live its values, an organisation needs to be constantly working at being values-led. And there's essentially 3 features of a values-led organisation. Firstly, it's explicit in naming and defining its values. Secondly, it's coherent in giving expression to those values in priorities, processes and practice. And often organisations focus on values at the level of behaviours and staff behaviours, but that doesn't really go far enough, we would argue. And thirdly, the values-led organisation is consistent in engaging and embedding those values in a systematic way across all its functions and in an ongoing way. So the first element there in terms of being explicit in naming values, the starting point for ILMI in this process was in regard to the review of the last strategic planning period. And looking at the last strategic plan, the values were there, they were named, however, they hadn't been defined. And if we're to live our values with confidence, we need to go beyond one-word value labels to develop and agree a collective and shared understanding of each value that aligns with the mission and vision. And in the absence of such a shared meaning, the values are open to interpretation and consequently to how they might get expressed. And in doing this interrogation with the team, there was very fruitful discussions about the values and what they actually meant. The value of independence, for example, when unpacked, was identified as potentially suggesting an ambition for independence as being to live alone. However, for ILMI, independence does and must encompass interdependence. ILMI, therefore, through the discussions, identified that agency was a much more holistic way to encompass the concept of independent living. So in undertaking the process of identifying and developing a shared meaning for the value, the organisation usefully needs to go further than that. So not just defining the values, but also to develop what we call a values statement. And in this, it involves developing high-level benchmarks for each value. So ILMI developed for each value a high-level outcome benchmark, which sets out the implication of each value in regard to the change sought, and a high-level process benchmark, which sets out the implication of each value for how the organisation goes about its work. And these benchmarks will provide ILMI with a tool to check that it's remaining true to and living its values when making decisions, when developing plans, policies, programmes, procedures, and when reviewing its work. And then the second feature at the heart of the values-led organisation is about being coherent in giving expression to values in priorities, processes and practice. And the starting point for ILMI in this was in the review of the last strategic plan. And in this process, in addition to identifying outputs and outcomes, we also sought to identify where each of the core values was evident in results, processes and relationships. And the learning from this audit informed the strategic plan that's been launched today. And it identified learning about where and how the values are being engaged. And through this discussion, we learned that the value of empowerment emerged as really central to ILMI's mission and goals, and that collective empowerment was identified as a core component of this value in terms of how ILMI does its work, but also the desired level of ambition for the organisation in regard to this value. And coherence was further established in terms of developing the objectives for the new plan. So ILMI's core values, as identified, defined and benchmarked, each pointed up a direction for the organisation, and a coherent direction because obviously the values are interlinked. And this was developed into strategic objectives that link directly back to each core value. And this is a valuable basis from which to ensure a coherence in giving ongoing expression to the core values in the priorities to be pursued over the period of this plan. And then the third feature of the values organisation is consistency in attempting to engage the values and embed them in a systematic way. And in this, organisations are challenged to have systems and processes in place to do this. And ILMI valuably identified the need to have systems and process through, for example, to ensure an ongoing tracking of values engagement in monitoring outputs and outcomes, but also in organising processes of reflection to check that the organisation is staying aligned with its core values in the face of external influences and pressures and also internal change. And ILMI further identified the need to focus on systems and processes in place to ensure a consistent engagement of values, particularly in communicating those values and engaging them in its strategic communications, and also in making alliances within the sector and beyond on the basis of shared values. And in conclusion, I would say that ILMI stands out for being a values-led organisation, and it does set an important exemplar for wider civil society in that regard. This is important for ILMI in seeking to be an organisation that is attractive to those who seek equality of outcome and the fulfilment of rights for disabled people, and that is effective in the pursuit of these goals. It's important for wider civil society that is under external pressure, and where such pressures can result in values drift and consequently being directed away from our ambitions. And thirdly, ILMI, in being explicit, coherent and consistent about its values, will have important stories to tell over the coming years in terms of this approach to achieving social change and the learning from this, and we all look forward to those stories. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Apologies, the microphone, there seems to be some electrical problems in IHREC. I've been informed that this part of the building is the only room with power, so I had a quip to IHREC that this is one of the rare instances where a DPO is in sole possession of power. So this room has the power at the moment, so let's go with that for the moment. I want to thank Rachel and Neil for the work that Values Lab did with us as an organisation through board, staff and membership and the external stakeholders. And it was a tough and very rigorous but immensely rewarding process for us as an organisation. Rachel has touched on some of those values and how we're going to give expression to those in the plan. So I'm going to ask some of my colleagues to briefly go through what those values are, to give it a bit of depth on the day, and then we'll pass over to the Minister, who has kindly agreed to launch the plan. So I'm going to go to Shelly first, if that's okay.
I'm going to talk about human rights. Human rights are the discovery, capacity and control over one's life. It involves having options and making informed decisions. Statement of outcome. ILMI seeks to promote and support disabled people's involvement in activism and their participation in collective action and decision making through providing and advocating for the required supports and the range of options and advocating for the removal of barriers. Statement of process. ILMI provides collective spaces for thinking, sharing knowledge and building skills, and works in a manner that offers opportunities for disabled people to use this thinking, knowledge and skills in taking action to realise their rights and achieve their full potential. Over the course of our strategic plan, ILMI will provide and support disabled people's involvement in activism and their participation in collective action and decision making. ILMI will undertake the following strands of activity: engagement and connect disabled people through outreach initiatives, making connections, building relationships and presenting ILMI's perspective. Capacity building for activism through training, peer mentoring and support, and analysing development. Build and facilitate collective peer-led spaces to stimulate and enable belonging, collectivism and activism.
Thanks, Shelly.
Okay, facing the audience. Okay. So my name is Fiona, and I work for ILMI, and I'm really, really proud to talk about collective empowerment and working with Neil and okay,
Rachel.
Rain was really, really terrific, and it was a real opportunity for me as a disabled person to understand my internal values, but how I want them to transcend into collective empowerment. So for ILMI, collective empowerment is about organising, it's about shared analysis, it's about representation, and it's about consultation, and that's really, really important to us. It involves giving voice to the lived experience, which is really, really important, of being disabled. So we live in a non-disabled world, and building collective power for change, which is really fundamental to our work. So our statement of outcome, and I did an awful lot of reading about statement of outcome before I kind of processed the meaning. So our statement of outcome seeks to secure the recognition of and support for disabled people's organisations and their value as authentic, anonymous spaces to build shared perspectives and make collective decisions, which is really, really, really important. Okay, and to amplify and represent these perspectives in decisions and seeking systematic change. Our statement of process, so ILMI builds alliances and develops and signals pathways for disabled people's involvement, for real involvement in ILMI and the wider disability movement. We work in a manner that is authentic, democratic, and participative in our decision-making and representation work as a disabled persons organisation. Over the course of our strategic plan, ILMI will secure a recognition of and support for disabled persons organisations and their value as authentic, anonymous spaces. ILMI will undertake the following strands of activity. So we will all... No pressure. We will all organise, support, build capacity, which is really important, of the network of local disabled persons organisations to form and advocate for the collective interests of disabled people, which is really, really, well, I can't stress how important that is. We will engage with relevant stakeholders, with you guys and more, an organisation at a local level, okay, to identify and secure funding streams for disabled persons organisations and promote inclusion, genuine inclusion and accommodation for disabled persons organisations in relevant local structures and networks. Movement building is important to us through engaging in national disabled persons organisations, including through the Disabled Persons Organisations Network, to promote networking and shared learning, build and strengthen agreed understanding of the nature and role of a disabled persons organisation, promote shared organisational values and common agendas and joint initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for coming today. It's really great to see everyone. My name is James and I work for ILMI. It was just great to hear everyone. I am told to stick to verbatim to script, and I will. But just to say, I'm just thinking about the last time we did one of these was in 2019. And Peter Cairns, who is a colleague of ours, and a lot of people know Peter, he wasn't here. He was in Nepal, and yeah, he climbed Mount Everest. He was climbing up to base camp for his 25th wedding anniversary with his wife. But anyway, poor old Divil, he got dysentery. But we sent him with the T-shirt up Mount Everest. So he took a picture of himself on Mount Everest base camp with the T-shirt and a grin on his face. And this week is in New York. So I'm just wondering the next time where he's going to be. So I'm just thinking about Peter. He's not dead or anything, but just thinking about him today. And he'd love to be here. And Nicola too, who's down in Cork, and she would love to be here. So I'm just going to speak briefly about social justice. And I will be brief about it, and I'll read it from this. Social justice is about making rights real and achieving a more equal distribution of resources. It involves dismantling structural ableism and embedding the social model of disability in policy thinking, policy making, and policy implementation. We will seek to shape and secure the policies, plans, legislation, services, and resources that will ensure the full and active participation of disabled people in society. We will challenge the negative narratives of disability and disabled people, both institutional and individual discrimination, structures and systems that disempower, and vested interests that will maintain the status quo. We will work in a manner that is independent and creative in offering hope and that change is possible. Over the course of this strategic plan, ILMI will shape and secure the policies, plans, legislation, services and resources that will ensure the full and active participation of disabled people in society. And we will undertake the following strands of activity. Policy advocacy, where we will work to secure the development and implementation of policies, legislations and strategies to improve the situation and experience of disabled people, developing agendas for this change and representing these agendas through policy forums and key decision-making structures. And amplify support for this work to secure real impact. We will promote and deliver disability equality training to key disability stakeholders, or key stakeholders even. And we will map potential allies and engage in alliance building with civil society organisations to secure equality and rights outcomes for disabled people, and to act in solidarity in progressing broader agendas for equality and human rights. And we will devise and engage in public education and awareness campaigns. And I think this is one thing that I've always loved about ILMI, is that from DOT, we've always done with our collective and had that authentic voice coming through. We don't try and spin that, but just develop that. And we still do that. And I think that's something very nice and unique about it. But not unique to us, but it's something that I'm very proud of, and we hold that value. So I shut up now. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks to James. James said, I'm not going to go off topic. And then it's like watching a tightrope walker. You're going, I'm just not sure. But, you know, he is right to reference many of our colleagues, many of the board and many members who couldn't be here today. But what we're presenting is very much a collective of a movement that has generated a values-based approach. Before I call on the Minister to formally launch the plan, most of the times when you have a strategic plan, it's launched and it doesn't mean anything. But as a staff team, well in advance of this launch, in every single aspect of our work, whether it's through the Voice Project and developing local DPOs in the south of the country, whether it's through peer mentoring, whether it's the collective empowerment work that we're doing at a local level or on a specific empowerment basis to build people's collective capacity, we're actually living and breathing those values well in advance of the launch of this plan. And one thing that we're very, very proud of is because we put a huge amount of thinking as an action in that capacity building. There's a glossary of terms, because we're thinking around disability equality. Words mean a lot to us, because that frames how we think around equality, how we frame our thoughts around human rights, how we frame our thoughts around collective empowerment, and importantly, how we frame our thinking around social justice. So those that take away the report or bring it home, hopefully in reading through, you don't get to the end and say, oh, that's it. We really think that part of that process of thinking as an action is around exploring the language around disability, around the models of disability, and particularly thinking around the social model of disability, because if we're talking about real change and social change and justice, It is very much about removing societal barriers that disable people in Ireland. And if we're talking about building an inclusive society, that's got to be the model that we have our understanding. So I'm now going to formally call on Minister Anne Rabbitte, who's been a huge supporter of ILMI since she's come into post and even beforehand, to formally launch her plan and say a few words. Thank you, Minister.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? You can. All right, that's good. So thank you very much, Damien and Nina, for the invite here today, and Des for your opening remarks. I'm delighted Rachel went before me and not me after, or not me before Rachel, because I really think you set out what is very important to all of us. And myself and Erin were just talking about it there, and I think it's in all organisations. What is your value? What is your core value, and how can you stem from there? And I think you've set out actually core values here that have set the agenda for disabilities, and I am delighted that you have this work done in advance of us having put in place the next iteration of the National Disability Strategy, because we should actually be able to mirror the values within ILMI, DPOs, as part and parcel of us. And I think there's a core piece of work for us to do as well, be within the department, to actually understand what is the core objective, what is the core value, what is the core emphasis, and what is the process to bring it to reality. And that is not tethering how we do the next iteration, because I know that I'm joined here by Rossa here from the NDA, and I just turned around and I just said, wouldn't it be great? Like, you have really done an awful lot of the heavy lifting, and I'm gone off script too, James, but I do want to acknowledge the work that you have done as individuals and as a collective. And I heard very clearly the words there from the First Lady, Shelly, and from Emma, that piece about the human rights, but also about the perspective on it, and understanding the perspective, and actually by having the individual and the collective perspective on it, you can then actually, as an organisation, from the top down, but also from the bottom up, marry the two principles, and that brings real engagement, and that is powerful. That is change in itself. So I do look forward to continuing to work with the ILMI on drafting the next National Disability Strategy. And I go back to the values and the expressions and the processes on it. And I was listening very, very clearly to it, because I believe very clearly on values. And Noel, who's my advisor sitting behind the barrier there, he understands that when I say, no, that's not true to my value as a minister, I have to get the department to understand what my value is, because my value is not different to your value, which is putting the person at the centre and ensuring that the person's rights are met. And you can build anything on that. They're powerful. But if that doesn't work, it goes against my grain, is what I say inside in the office. It goes against the grain. And if it goes against the grain, I can't actually be true to it. So I do really respect the work you have done here, Damien. I really do. And I compliment you on this. So this strategy is a vital aspect of our government commitment to creating a more inclusive and equitable society. And it is intended to function as a full implementation plan for the UNCRPD, and will address various aspects of disability inclusion, spanning education, employment, transport and services. And that's the wider community piece that you hit on there, Damien. Importantly, in creating this strategy, we will engage with a wide range of stakeholders, with particular spotlight on the participation of disabled persons organisations, as laid out in the UNCRPD. And as we continue building the next National Disability Strategy, we recognise the paramount importance of engaging with DPOs, such as ILMI, and other disability stakeholders. And I keep going back to this, the collective that Emma spoke about, that is so important. So their input and active participation are the cornerstone upon which we aim to build something truly transformative. So it is wonderful that you have what you have here in your strategic plan, but it's also important that that strategic plan can also, you can feel it in the national disabilities span as well, that you can feel your values coming through that are core, central in human rights, collective empowerment and social justice. DPOs represent the voices and aspirations of disabled individuals in Ireland. Their lived experience, perspective and expertise are invaluable in shaping policies and directly impacting their lives. By closely collaborating with these stakeholders, we are not just meeting a requirement, we are engaging in a dialogue that enshrines the strategy with diverse insights and innovative solutions. Inclusive policy ensures that we recognise the unique challenges and opportunities that exist within communities. And I was in Donegal last Thursday. I was in Donegal last Thursday and I got a fantastic presentation, but sometimes when I leave rooms, the certain words matter. Inclusion is not a programme. It's what one lady said. Inclusion is not a programme. And I thought that was powerful. And when you understand what she was saying there, I think you have it encompassed completely here. So I do look forward to working with you, Damien, with the entire board, with the staff, but most importantly, with every single individual whose voices are part of the collective. We have a huge scope of work to do within the department. I have a huge power of work in the next rollout of the next National Disability Strategy. I look forward to working with all stakeholders, but it's important that we're thematic, we're structured, we hold strong values on it, because it actually has to align itself to the UNCRPD, the human rights piece. Completely, it has to be the core central of it, and if you have a strong core and true to your values, then you can see delivery, then people can feel that they're part of the solution. So that goes back then to your point there in relation to social justice. Sorry, James, your name, I just forgot it there for 30 seconds, apologies. So thank you very much for having me here this morning. I'm delighted to be here for the launch of it, and I can now officially say your strategy is launched.
Thank you very much, Minister. And very clearly, your commitment to that word dialogue has been present, and your leadership in terms of dialogue with DPOs has been present, and it's very, very welcome. Not only just as we go into the development of the new National Disability Strategy, but before that as well. That's a hugely important thing that we need to recognise today. Also to recognise Senator Erin McGrahan, who's a huge supporter of ILMI and many of the campaigns that we ran. I'm not going to name everyone in the audience because I'm conscious that people have travelled far and wide to be here today. We hope before you leave, not only do you read the plan cover to cover, there will be a quiz on the way out, but more importantly that you'll join us to celebrate that launch by having some lunch before we go. Before I do that, again, thanking the Minister, I want to thank the Minister's advisor Noel and Lavinia for organising for today. I want to particularly thank Nina for bringing it all together. All the staff team collectively played a huge role, not just in making the day a reality, but the realisation of our collective work plans for the next years ahead. I specifically want to mention the role of Des as chair. He offers huge wisdom, guidance and leadership to us as an organisation, but also he works with 9 other very strong board members to give us a really strong disabled persons organisation that we can be very proud that can confidently have this ambitious, values-led plan to realise our objectives over the next 3 years. So thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to talking to you, and make sure you grab a copy of the plan and that it informs some of your work as well. Thank you so much.
I'm delighted to be here at the launch of the strategies for the Independent Living Movement Ireland and moving forward in the next phase of the organisation and bringing more inclusion into Ireland as a whole for people living with disabilities.
This morning's event here with the ILMI has been really exciting because it brought together some very, very good policies which were developed by people with disabilities ourselves, but equally important, it brought together people of all ages and all persuasions, and we were able to engage with the Minister Anne Rabbitte, and in a very, very friendly way, and we're able to talk and communicate with each other rather than at each other. And for anybody who was here, there was no one in charge or anything like that. It was a very, very free day, and from a man, I was particularly delighted, looking back on the old ways, to see so many women involved in disability liberation, because too often the work that women do in their own lives in regard to disability is so overlooked. So that's one of the reasons I was happy.
Always engaged.
ILMI always engaged with their members. It's always about disabled people. They always represent them. They always put disabled people in the centre. And the social model. With the social model. It's always about what we need as disabled people.
Hi, I'm Claire Kenny, Policy Assistant with ILMI. Today's been a brilliant day full of loads of activity. Really enjoyed the atmosphere, and hearing the Minister talk so passionately about the new strategy for disabled people that is coming soon, and that GPOs will be a fundamental part of that is really powerful. Yeah, I really feel that our values are really apt for the new plan going forward, and I look forward to the next 3 years. Thank you very much.